Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine, and this is your Rattlecast for Tuesday, October 8th. It's a beautiful day up here in the mountains of Southern California. I got to play a little tennis for the first time in a while, and then it's chilling off nicely. We have a pot of the season's first Irish stew brewing in the kitchen behind us. So I'm going to look forward to that after today's show. I want to let you know before we really start, I'm thinking about switching the format up just a little bit. And I think what we might do is I think we will have a pre-show. We'll call this the pre-show before we get into the guest poet. And I think we'll start that about at a quarter to the hour. So whatever time it is now, jump in 15 minutes earlier. And that way it will save us from the problem of the stream's not working and things not connecting. We can test everything out. If it doesn't work, we can kick that part off of the podcast. Because what we're really doing here is we are building a podcast live in front of you just for the fun of it. And I have a lot of fun with these, and I hope you do too. So I think we're going to start about for my time, West Coast time, it'll be 5:45, and then we'll have the featured poet come on right at 6 o'clock. And that way people who want to just see the featured poet will be able to tune in right when the featured poet that week comes on. And the people who want more can do a kind of a prologue show, and we'll sort of chat and keep it more casual. If you want to have any questions, you can ask me in the chat. Which reminds me right now, if you have any questions, Brother Yao is our poet today. I'll be calling him in just a little bit. If you have any questions for me or for Brother Yao, please leave me a message in the chat. I'm watching the chat right now. So to kick off the show today, first I should say Rattle is a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to promote the practice of poetry. We were founded in 1995 and have been publishing continuously since then. And we are unaffiliated with any other organization. We're an independent 501c3. Thanks so much for joining us, as always, and spending your Tuesday night. Now, to start out, I thought we would show or play a few poems by Alejandro Escude. He was the poet that we published for Poets Respond this Sunday. And it's a pretty interesting poem, I thought. The really cool thing, in my opinion, is that I couldn't tell if he was being sincere or facetious. And the interesting thing is that the poem works really well as a poem either way. So I thought maybe we'd play... Alejandro is one of those people who submits to Poets Respond almost weekly. He's always sort of in there. We've published him a half dozen times at least, if not more. We also interviewed Alejandro in Rattle number, what issue was that? 658 maybe, if I remember right, or 59, something like that. So it was the Immigrant Poets issue. And so here is Alejandro Escude to start us off and get us in the mood for poetry. Here he is reading Hellbent.
Hellbent. One could be strolling at the farmer's market in a foul mood, yet still shelling out cash to buy heirloom tomatoes and prized beets. And some busybody is sure to take issue with the tilt of your grin, hunched shoulders, your self-pity on display. Are they afraid? He's becoming unhinged, they write, they say, hell-bent on destroying the anger in the man, and then the man inside the man. I was there, like Trump, mad as hell, victimized, trolled, scrutinized, like a lab rat who refuses to eat the cheese. I have fantasies of lighting up a cigarette in my classroom, go scream at the principal, of letting them all see the results of a bitter yet muted divorce. I, too, wish to make friends with dictators, destroy those who speak the language as though it were made of flowers. My language, iron-fisted, uncontrolled, ruinous. Fuck the eternal press conference, I say. Even a bully can be bullied. For years, I also wore my conflicts like a suit. I wanted to force them to eat their own faces. I was a frightened, panicked brute. So forgive me if I take offense when you call the president repugnant, aberrant, unhinged, as if there were a door to have been attached to, a house beyond the door to love. My mood was as foul as the leaders of the free world, as I was repugnant, aberrant, and I, too, built 1,000 walls.
So that was Hellbent by Alejandro Escude. This was Sunday's poem for Poets Respond. And I thought we'd play two more poems really quick. So it's a sort of a triptych of Alejandro's poems about Trump and current politics. This one actually he submitted for Poets Respond, but it felt timeless enough, and I think we had another poem I really wanted to do that week, so we decided to put it into issue number 62. So here's Alejandro Escude again, reading A River of Stars.
A river of stars. Look how things have turned around on the criminal deep state. Donald J. Trump. I visited once the deep state. Nobody met me there. Alone, I guided myself along its abandoned roads. The tree stumps contorted into the torsos of long-dead heroes. A sinkhole every couple of miles or so kept me on my toes. I spoke to a local who was all eyes, no mouth or ears. He stared at me in amazement, then sadness. I found a church in the distance. Then the distance became the church. There were bottle caps on the side of the road, which I mistook for bottle caps. A woman sat in a rocking chair. She signaled that the train approached, soundless. I moved away just in time, and she beckoned me to her side. You don't want what you want, she said. I didn't understand because I'm not from the deep state. She dropped her chin, murmuring, You should have come yesterday. Everywhere there were men hanging from trees by their neckties. Naked women danced in red-lit rooms of abandoned hotels. I approached one, but she grew smaller with each step I took toward her. I opened the door, and there was nothing in the room except a warm red glow. Across the street I could see men walking into other rooms, then embraced by other women who wouldn't shrink. Above, time flowed on, a river of stars. And in the bars, the cups were empty of drink, though the patrons imbibed to excess, stumbling over themselves, 3 or 4 spiraling like tumbleweeds. Across the vast, though arid fields, grungy farm workers planted tiny Bibles like seeds in fruitless dirt. One smiled at me dumbly as he bent up from his work.
So that was Alejandro Escude reading A River of Stars. And you can tell there's a lot of, I don't know, that poem just cracks me up every time, kind of. Just the thought of the deep state as an actual place. And here's the last poem we'll read from Alejandro. This is I Heart James Comey, going back a little farther to May 14th, 2017. And here he is, Alejandro Escude reading I Heart James Comey.
I Heart James Comey. I wonder if you feel like me, James Comey. I wonder if they whisper that you're an authoritarian behind your back as well. An untrustworthy independent. A thinker. By God, your own man. I wonder if you feel like me, James Comey. Looking at those grim senatorial faces from your desk and microphone, as I look at my high school students, always on the hot seat, but not daring to show it. A sip of water, and I'm off to explain myself, my timing and my thinking. Do you feel like me, James Comey? Always the scapegoat for things that are hardly ever in your control? Do you feel the snake of anxiety wrapping itself around you at midnight? Do you feel like me, James Comey? When a group of childish parents decide to call the principal and complain? He's an authoritarian, they say, and the next morning you're dismissed for the following year. Thank you, but you don't quite fit in, Mr. Comey. Thank you for reporting on me 3 times that you were not reporting on me. Thank you, Mr. Comey. Thank you. Thank you. Did you feel like me, Mr. Comey, when your letter came, as my letter came, in the mail as well? We thank you for your services and wish you best of luck with your future endeavors. Do you feel like me, Mr. Comey, knowing you did your best, that you tried to follow the book as well as the book in your heart, and that they both had failed?
So that was Alejandro Escude reading a triptych of poems there that kind of all related, I felt. So I thought it'd be fun to start the show out that way and get us in the mood for poetry. Now I'm going to call up Brother Yao, and he was kind of running low on batteries, so we didn't want to start the phone call already. But let me give him a call. I'm going to throw up, this is what we're going to do for the show from now on. That first 15 minutes or so is going to be the pre-show or the prologue, and then we'll throw up the splash screen again, put on some bumper music while I call the guest, and then we'll have the guest all ready to go right at 6 o'clock. That's the idea. But now we're doing this at 6:15. So let me put this up, and we'll be right back with Brother Yao. So we published Brother Yao twice. First in issue number, hang on a second. We have him in issue number 52 and issue number 60. And his book is Inheritance. And Brother Yao read at our reading series last year and dropped me off a copy of this book. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful book. I have to say, it's the kind of book that made me love poetry in the first place, because it's full of really rich metaphor and really intense personal detail that's down to earth and grounded at the same time. So it's a great book. So glad he shared it with me, and I thought I would bring him on to the show today. Just to read his bio really quick, Brother Yao, Hoke Esclover III, is a professor at Boise State University and former owner of Caribou Books and author of Inheritance. His work has appeared in numerous publications, including African American Review, Crab Orchard Review, Smartish Pace, Plowshares, and a whole bunch of others. And he also performs musically at Free Black Space. So let's bring him in now. Here is Brother Yao. Good. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, I'm sitting in my office at Bowie State. Yeah, so but it's good, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're so that's in on the outskirts of Maryland, right? I mean, Baltimore. I mean.
Well, actually, right in between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. So we're closer to D.C. than Baltimore, but we're about maybe 20 minutes outside of D.C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and did you grow up there, or did you move there, later in life?
No. I've born and raised in born in New York, but raised in PG County, and I'm actually an alum of the university that I teach
Oh,
at.
are you?
So is
Oh, cool.
my oldest son, yeah. And so I've been in this area pretty much all my life, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, do you want to read a poem to sort of start us out? Then we'll talk a little bit more.
Yeah, and actually, I'd like to read two poems together, if that's all right.
Yeah, go
Should
ahead.
be. The first one is an earlier poem called "The Science of Forgetting," which is from Inheritance, and both of the poems are about my father. And I guess and this may be interesting for folks that listen in, is the poet evolves over time, and the first poem is about and one of the themes in Inheritance is my mother and my father on the front of the book. One of the themes in Inheritance is their relationship, and so the science of forgetting sort of talks about abandonment. And then I'm going to read another poem, which is called "My Father Rides His Horses into the Distance," which is a poem that I wrote maybe about, I don't know. I mean, I wrote it within the last year, so it's probably about a 10-year gap between the two poems. But similar to this issue of abandonment, but both of the poems take different approaches, and one is an evolution that comes at a later stage in life.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, "The Science of Forgetting." The simple flush of a toilet, a way to send shit to the same place trains disappear to as they wind around the tracks. The future or the past, the dirty secrets woven into time, the smell you remember, that she was cooking chicken the way you like it, spinach with garlic and ginger, filling the air with the thick smell love becomes in a house past being new, a house past its past, that it will stand on its stone, creak with the wind, break into tiny bits and pieces, the sink or doorknob, and you will have to fix it. She was throwing the clothes across the floor into piles to wash them, thinking you were still her husband, cleaning the house in a day dress, pine or some fresh air from a bottle as you broke out through the door and found yourself heavy, sandbags around your ankles, the damp air stuffed into the season of rain, the basement of the old house. The way any man feels when he leaves, quick steps, exit, the house where the children lie awkward like dolls in their sleep, legs hanging over the edge of beds, hands over their eyes to hide their dreams trapped in their heads. The worst, he would not come home, ever. Somewhere in smoke, in wine, miming his other life before he made one decision that made 100. Others, like dominoes, beans, or rice, the one being insignificant, the whole being nourishment. This is life once you start running it. You can't get out. Clamped to the edge of a bar, buying drinks and a stare into the eyes from whoever will listen, whoever is thirsty for the stories we all carry like the waste in our bowels or the hair on our heads, uncountable, to answer to no one, not even love, the trickster, the 98 degrees we all must carry, though it is unbearable, bearing down on the body in summer, even when you're half naked, something cool would do you right, like running water rolling down your face. There is more love to be made, more love to be gotten. The philosophy of the Boer, the pioneer. There was a buffalo and we killed it. There was land and we made it into miles. So when we travel, we register the senseless wandering and say we have accomplished something so simple, flying across the sea instead of sailing it. What I am saying is like my father, many men have found themselves standing on the tip of their greatest moment and fell. And thinking they were climbing, they wandered the earth for the rest of their lives, finding no rest, running like water. And then I'll read the other poem, which is called "My Father Walks It Right." My father rides his horses into the distance. My father rides his horses into the distance. What now? She asks, and slams the door. Violence hidden and the sex underneath that. Walk across the room and cry a little, but don't let nobody see it. Both of them, like opposites and ideas, with flesh pasted on the skeletons. Then the dust comes, then the speeches, then the long rants and heads, fights that have no words, the dead people who could not rest, the sun going down. The old streets of the city where once there were horses, a man singing ice, milk, butter, bread, what it's all about. He goes outside and talks to the man in the always winter, the cold heated by his breath. He whispers and the white smoke rises. He sings the only song he knows. He will not go back into the house. He buys a horse who is too old to run and grabs the rope and walks him down the street and into the night, and the cold swallows him.
Great poems.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So the first question I have, which I really wanted to ask you when I met you, a year ago at our reading, is what is Brother Yao and what's the significance of that? What does that mean?
Well, Yao is when I was 21. I had a name changing ceremony and took the name Yao. It's an Akan name, which means Thursday born.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Yusef Komunyak is a changed name. Haki Matabuti is another example. Afayim Weaver. And then Amir Baraka, Leroy Jones.
Mm-hmm.
So that as people study more African history and culture, one of the things that's a sign of the past is the name.
Yeah.
And my name in particular, Hoke, was the name of a guy that he actually I think he was maybe like Secretary of State at one point in time, but he was he ran on a white supremacist ticket as governor of Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
but he happened to show up in the small town where my grandfather was born. And so, as he became famous, that was the name that they gave us. So, I wanted to change that name, but as time has gone on, I always leave my father's name in the parentheses, and it depends
Mm-hmm.
on the day. I've changed it up all types of ways now because it's such an unusual name that if somebody knew my father, and that's this whole question of inheritance.
Yeah.
If somebody thinks good of me and sees my name, I want them to get that name too,
Mm-hmm.
even though I believe in the changed name.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's what I was going to ask, because the book is so much about your father that I think it's cool that you use both name and you keep your original name too. So what does Yao mean though? Did that come from somewhere?
Yeah, it's from Ghana, and it means Thursday born. Very common name in Ghana. But the strange thing is, I've spent time in China, and Emperor Yao, in the Tao and in Chinese mythology is a really important Yao. And the character in Chinese, I mean, there are numerous characters for, a sound like Yao, but the character that corresponds to Emperor Yao is really interesting. It's what is it? And then my Chinese is terrible. My Mandarin's terrible, but Santu, which is 3 earths. So it's 3 earths that build up to become like a mountain.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of beauty, but that wasn't my intention when I chose the name. It was a reference to Ghana, but the same sound exists in Mandarin, which is something I found out later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. Do you want to read a couple more poems?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So this one.
And remember, if they're from the book, let me know the page so I can show it.
Okay. Yeah. And this is Valentine's Day.
Okay.
which is from the book. You want the page is 45.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right, Valentine's Day. There's no such thing as a white girl. Race, that brick made by men, built no temples. We know the world was never white. We know it's a construct, an idea, a sticky substance on rat tracks, like glue. Once my mother put them out and the hairs were stuck to it. A rat is an animal we're not supposed to feel sorry for, but I did, watching it squirm as I slipped it into a bag from the grocery store while my mother shrieked, she who had done the deed. There's no such thing as a black boy. There's politics and Black History Month, a man in uniform whose back is straight like the finger of my son pointing to the sky. Look, no, look. That was then and this is now. What are roses? What was her name? I liked her and took $2 to school, licked 25 envelopes shut. Be mine forever. The heart's candy, dusty chalk. My daddy brought my mama a large red encased plastic heart, the size of it. Each candy was a mystery. What was in the center? There's no such thing as love. People believe what they want. I know better now. Race is an idea, but a man possessed with it converts it to instinct. Them lions look trained, but they're still animals. It's not about love. And did she love me or love me not? It was Daisy Duke and Farrah Fawcett on TV, blonde hair, blue eyes, and little black boys finally immigrating into America by way of integration, by way of the bus ride to the other side of town. There's Lady Liberty above us, staring into the ocean while we stand up next to tiny desk and star-spangled banner, tired, poor, and weak across the sea, where slave ships turn to chalkboard mist. We hold hands. She says, be mine, and our eyes roll back in our heads. Did she love me or love me not? And then secrets. I did not tell you about the eyes of the first fish I ever caught. They were glossy and much like a man's. And I stared at them in a way you cannot stare at the living. Though he, the fish, was alive and maybe looking at me too, who had caught him for sport and hunger and excuse and mystery about being a man. Often, when I dip my hands in the river in the morning's fog, I feel the warmth the water is. He comes back. I wanted him to be trophy. I know what to do with fish, but have no place for his eyes. And then buttoning my shirt. In the morning, in the mirror, my father ties his tie after he runs the razor across his cheek. Tiny nick, blood, band-aid. I watch his back, see his face in the mirror, and learn how to stare the day down like dudes trying to take my smile from me. Rip it off my face. My shirt on my back falls loose like I'm cool until I button the circles with eyes and it tightens until I get to my neck, my throat, tie the knot. I'm staring you in the eyes, Daddy. I got your back and your face in the mirror. It's morning. I'm buttoning my shirt. And I'm sorry I didn't give you those page numbers.
him, so we're all good.
All right. I'll read one more from Inheritance. And this one is called Tomatoes. And it's page 35.
Thanks.
It says, there is a hole in your chest where your lung used to be. But with your overalls on, the same old man opens the glass door outside to stand among the 4-foot-tall tomato plants. Your breath is heavy under the noonday sun. A cough, a cool sound, raspy, like the low talking jazz musicians who say the day and its wisdom. Your true voice speaking of plants, growing soft, low, almost whispering. There is dying, you know, and joy, fighting, bleeding, and strength within you. Force of the world, like the tomatoes rise from your tiny patch of earth each spring. I see for the first time a tooth missing when you smile, and in your hand the red fruit almost perfectly round.
Well, thanks for sharing those. You know, the poems, it takes me back to my relationship with my own father reading these poems. And I'm estranged from him. I haven't seen him in 30 years. So it's kind of a very powerful book for me to read. Does your
He's still alive, Tim?
My father is still alive. Yeah. Yeah.
But you haven't seen him in 30 years?
I haven't seen him in 24 years, I guess, or something like that. So, yeah.
You speak to him?
I do not.
I hear that. I'll get backstory later. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's you have that poem that we published today is the daily poem, putting the N words to rest, and he used to use that word, and he would. I don't know. He was a liar, and I don't want to go on about it, but he kicked me out of the house, and I haven't seen him since. But it sort of brings me back because there's good in there too. There's good and there's just such a mix of the relationships with fathers and sons are so complex, and you really get to it sort of in a lot of different angles in this book.
Yeah, and for me, I'm estranged from my mother, and that's probably the first time I've ever said that publicly, But I guess you opened the door for me. But estrangement is hard, and when I wrote this book, I wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and I always say this when I'm talking about inheritance. I began the process of writing the book. It's a collection of poems that covers about 20 years of my life. And so, I had my children very young. I was 21 when my daughter was, I was 20. I was 21 when my daughter was conceived. So, and I began a bookstore, and, I got married young. And, there's this way in which, my children, have taught me about life,
Mm-hmm.
And my father died when I was really young. My father died in 94. So I was, 24 then. And so that idea of reflecting about my father and his death and his life and my family as I built my own family is really like the core of or the root of a lot of the other things it is that I've done. So, again, I think, and again, I study, the I Ching or I Ching
Mm-hmm.
a lot. And, they talk about household, and, this Chinese thing where household is like hexagram number 37 in the I Ching. And it talks about how, the relationships that exist in society, there's a blueprint for that exists within the context of a family,
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what I've tried to do in a really simple way, and I probably didn't even try to do it, to be honest. I just write, and when I was going back and collecting the poems, getting at, adequate, not adequate, but getting at like portrayals of, my father and my parents that, and remembering, the good and the bad or the pain and the loss or capturing those images, is a lot of the work that I've done, and I mean, it's hard for me to imagine, and I have to say this too, is like Stanley Plumley, and I missed his, if you know that poet, he passed, but he was one of my teachers at the University of Maryland, and he recently passed, and I sort of think of him as a father figure, and I found when I was getting my MFA with him, I went and read his books. And I found a lot of just beautiful poems about his father that sort of captured, some of the sadness and the grief, but also a sort of quiet beauty. And I want to say like measured steps. It's like the word that comes to my mind. And so I think the other thing is when I was getting my MFA, which is shortly after my father died, and I sort of connected with Stan, that's one of the things that I sort of spent a lot of time investigating when I was doing that original work. And it's just sort of followed me, as I've gone on. And the other thing, too, is I just think, the thing I'm getting at in my work now, like the manuscript that I'm working on, I have 2 manuscripts. One is called The Common Song. And again, that comes out of like a simplicity in language that to me is sort of like rooted to like that family thing. It may seem odd to people now, but I want a poem that, I like strive for a poem that just has, simplicity, and I'm not saying that like other poets are not trying to be simple. I think people are trying to do the work that they're going to do, but that idea of a common song and how that sort of relates to inheritance, people don't want to talk about poetry being accessible. And I mean, one of the things I really love about Rattle is how Rattle is a well lauded magazine, but I always feel like the work is accessible,
Yeah, well, that's what
like
that's what we try to do. Yeah.
But again, there's and I'm walking very carefully, like in the Tao it says, walking across thin ice, but in today's day, that simplicity is something that some poems I read, I can find a doorway in because I've studied long enough. I mean, I think, to be a poet and to read and to study almost anything should be accessible. But I also think, simplicity. And, again, when you get to Asian work, I mean, I go back and check out Levi all the time. And, but, there's this way that, the simplicity and then how that roots into, or how that connects with natural imagery and stuff like that, what I'm trying to achieve in my work,
Yeah. Well, it comes through, and there's this way that you leap through image and metaphor. Like there's a casual sense to the speech, and then you just a freedom to go off in any direction you want, which is what I really like about what you do.
And 2 of the poems that I read, The Science of Forgetting, and then also the Valentine's Day, both of those poems are really, just sort of another approach to the work. There's really a jazz aesthetic that's at work there. It's like I'm very much connected to music. And so when you talk about juxtaposing images and some of the shifts, and some of the leaps that occur, there's an idea. And I spent a lot of time, I don't do it as much now, but I spent probably a good decade trying to figure out how it is that you take a poetic line and you establish something like a melody.
Oh. Well, his call just dropped, so let me try to call him back. Hang on a second. Hopefully it wasn't his... let me see. We'll call him back. Just a second. It's the first time that's happened. It might be that his phone ran out, or... Yeah, it might be. He said he forgot to bring his charger because he had to go to the office to do this. And the phone probably just ran out of batteries. We'll try them again in a little bit. How about that? But first, we're still talking about Brother Yao. Let's see, where is it? Mr. Wamble over on the chat asks if he has a schedule for writing or only writes when he's inspired. And I actually printed out his contributor note from issue number 52. And he talks about that a little bit. So I'll read that here. That'll answer your question, I think. Here he says, I usually arrive to work early and read and write while most of the world is still silent. Though I teach, what I write still seems like a secret. Poetry for me is the refinement of some balance between the internal, wordless world of human cognition and the empire of language. He's calling us back right now. Hey, Hoke, yeah, we lost you for a second. So I was just reading your contributor note from issue number 52, which I love. So I'm glad we got you back. I was worried it was the battery running out. So I guess it was just the internet connection that lost.
Yeah, and I had to change accounts because I told you with my machine. What did I say? I don't even remember.
I'll read it again for you because I love especially this line that I just had read. You wrote, I usually arrive. Oh, let me introduce it a little for you because Mr. Wamble over on the chat room asks if you have a schedule for writing or if you only write when you feel inspired. And so you address that in this note. You say, I usually arrive to work early and read and write while most of the world is still silent. I lost my place. Though I teach, what I write still seems like a secret. Poetry for me, this is what I love. Poetry for me is the refinement of some balance between the internal, wordless world of human cognition and the empire of language. I love that phrase, empire of language. At this stage of my life, I've lost most of my belief, but each morning brings some new thing. I'm learning to trust the sunrise even when I cannot answer its questions or share what it gives me with the rest of the world. So that was your note back in whatever year that was.
Oh, wow. Interesting, yeah.
So that was summer 2016. So like 3 years ago you wrote that. So is that still true? Do you still write in the morning?
I keep mentioning China, man, but I'm such a heavy Tai Chi practitioner, and it really relates to that comment. Is that part of what I found in Tai Chi now is a chance to deal with the cognition without the words.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm writing a little bit less now. And my mornings usually go to my Tai Chi practice, but that's the strange thing too, is that I consider it to be almost the same discipline, which is, I think, that, the way cognition works, that, ultimately, the poet, again, I guess, stands at a bridge between what we know and knowing being cognition, which is beyond words. And so the poet, works at that bridge and then forges things into words so that we can realize and actualize what we already know and manage it within the context of a society. So a lot of my work now, same discipline, but a lot of my work now has been exploring some of that cognition outside of the world, outside of the world of words,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like writing itself is a kind of meditation, and it reminds me, like qigong or playing sports for me. Like if I'm playing baseball, there's that sense of yourself dissolving, and there's sort of meditative spirit that's going on where that it's the notan in Buddhism, that sense of no self, and I think you get that from writing, and you get that from a whole lot of different things. So so I definitely hear you there.
Yeah. And, inspiration, is, and the sort of dialogue with that question, I don't even know what inspiration is anymore, man.
Yeah.
After 30 years of writing poetry, man, and, and teaching it, I may be a little marred, man, but I'm like, what's the work, man?
Yeah.
What's the schedule? Rise up early. And, and go through rhythms. And I always tell my students, too, my rhythm, and I don't know if I put it in that, but I usually read and write.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell my students that if the reading is so good, that you don't figure out how to write, you probably stepped over, an important, or you climbed up the ladder or, crossed an important threshold. Because
Mm-hmm.
on those mornings when I'm open to receiving the work, and the spirit work of other poets, I will not put out the energy and try and write, but just sort of enjoy and sit in that moment. So I think the two disciplines, they go together,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of feed and fuel each other, Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree. So let me ask, since you brought up China a couple times, how did you end up in China, and how long did you live there?
Yeah, I've taken three trips, and so the first one was in 2010, and I went to Jiangsu province and taught for a month, and then the second trip was to Wuhan, where I taught at Central China Normal University for about 9 months, um, and then I went back for a month the year after that. So I was there the year that Trump was elected.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there, I guess, whenever that election was. I was in China at that time, and then I went back the summer after. I didn't go this past summer, but I had long been fascinated with China, and when my bookstores closed down, right after I declared bankruptcy in 2010, I was like, what's one thing that I wanted to do that I never did because I was in business and I worked so hard, and China was the first thing that popped into my mind. And so I came up with a way to, take a trip there and build my Tai Chi practice and all of that.
Yeah,
Been
yeah.
a yeah, real good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Do you want to read a few more poems now? Maybe like newer
Yeah,
stuff?
yeah, sure. So these are a few poems from the the manuscript I was talking about, the Common Song. This is one that I read at the Rattle reading, which I really actually it's a poem I'm sort of attached to, and it relates to the theme and inheritance. And I think and I mentioned it earlier, the science of forgetting, and my father rides his horses into the distance. It's like I have a different set of reflections about my parents after completing this book, and this is one of the poems. It's called Love Song. It says, before I was born and born to an ambition, my father dreamed my mother as the woman he would one day love, not knowing her face or the innocence she cultivated like a small cup of tea on a large round table in the house of my grandparents. My grandfather's anger rattled the table. He slammed his hand down, and my mother sipped calmly from the chipped teacup. There was a place near the rim where she ran her tongue across it, the tiny waves. I was a dream then. We all are dreams. Nothing is impossible, they would tell me. We are all like the land, boundless and deep, stretching into horizons, beautiful and vast. When I am singing their song, even now, under the gentle fires of a calm life, I think of their love, its shape like clouds covering a moon at night. Sometimes you can see through them, the moon there shining bright, a strange flower in the sky. And then this is a poem, and I mean, I'm sure some of your listeners know Little Jimmy Scott, um, the Little Jimmy Scott jazz singer, and one of my mother's favorites. My mother taught a lot of important lessons about life through jazz musicians. I mean, it's pretty profound when I think about it now. But my mother would say, sometimes she would get a jazz album and she would be like, "You need to learn this, so you need to listen to this." So there's a way in which my mother was teaching me about the code of music through people's voices. So this is called At Last for Little Jimmy Scott. It says, a small man attaches himself to the stage. His voice clamps down like paper clips changed to vice grips. Oh, the straw of night, take your air carefully, don't you cry. They come blue tonight after the hurt. Hearts return to the trampled earth. Love's genius, breath heated, want, night never stops, gasping. We sway, crooked in rivers, long, skinny fingers touch, blood in his song. He sings like a woman with moonlight shining on her face. His cigarette dangles its shadow into the crowd like a black stick a man could use to beat his head back into place after love's dreams have blurred the night. Then I'm looking for another poem here.
While you're looking for it, let me ask, how did you get into poetry in the first place? That's always something I'm interested in finding out. It's such a strange thing for anybody to be doing. So I'm always wondering how the hell that happened.
Yeah, well, when I talk about it now, and actually it's interesting, you talked about that phrase, the empire language. One of the things on my blog is I have a series of essays called The Empire Language. And actually one of them is going to be published in an anthology coming up in the next month or two, which is Empire Language, like number 4. But in the first one, Empire Language, I talk about, and maybe it's not in the first one, but in quite a few of them, one of the themes is about, I think that I became a poet because my family as a child was sort of splintered, and I felt that I couldn't communicate with my family. And so right around the time I was about 16 years old, some stuff happened in my family. And that's the time that I started writing poetry. And there's this phrase in the Tao which says, Tao gives rise to all things, and te, or virtue, refines them. And so I really think that the idea of perfecting language for me, as it came about right around time I was about 16, really came because I felt like I couldn't communicate with the people that I loved in my home,
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe by the time I got to be when I was about 18 or 19, I attended the New School for Social Research, and I met Sekou Sundiata, and he's the one that told me I had to study the craft of writing. And that's when I began to, I guess, that's when I became maybe a practicing poet.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's when I, really sort of began to develop a discipline and sort of study the language in a different way. But the other thing too, and Sekou was so complex, is that, we always had a band. So his vision of poetry and artistry was not simply writing on the page and the text, but he performed with musicians all the time. So one of the reasons that I've continued to perform is because that's how I sort of entered the poetry world in a formal sense,
Mm-hmm.
not simply the MFA and writing and getting the words right, but also understanding the trajectory of African American music and the jazz tradition, and jollies, the African griots, all of that. That's a part of my artistry too. Music is very much connected to what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me ask one more thing. What do you think
Sure.
is the difference between performing music versus poetry? Like, is there a way that it's different and the same, or how do you think of the two? Are they the same?
You know, and I guess that's the thing is, in traditional West African music, so uh, uh, Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and I have some relationship with that music. Um, but in that tradition, the jolly or the griot is the poet, but they're also the master musician, and they're also the historian. And there's a way you can sort of sample that in and talk about it in a really lighthearted way. But in the context of oral traditions, that division didn't exist in those cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And again, Pan-African cultures are really, West Africa, we say Black folks came from West Africa, but West Africa is huge,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it's a wide area. But there's similarities in Nigeria and in Ghana. So for me, and I've been listening to Black Thought's like 10-minute freestyle for the last couple of days, and he's a hip hop artist with the roots. And every time I listen to it and I look at the range of references that he has, Voltaire, Tesla,
Mm-hmm.
Scott Fitzgerald, Things Fall Apart. It's like there's this way in which the text that he produces, even within the context of hip hop, which is in a musical sense, it's all about references. The same thing with jazz. Charlie Parker is playing a song, and there's a way in which Charlie Parker, or Duke Ellington or whatever, somebody takes a solo and they make reference to this intertextuality that exists within jazz music. So I think there's a way that I think it is the same, but I also think that given, the way print technology works and the empire of language, like what it means to distribute literature or to create an educational system that, can exist all over the world, I think there's a place where the text starts to become more important. But the bottom line is there's something about poetry. I mean, and that's why, a live broadcast like this is good. There's something about poetry that's about people, and like you being in a place with those people,
Mm-hmm.
and you reading it, and the breath and the air and the sunlight and whatever else it is going on, the shadows in the room. There's something about that lends itself to like music and performance. I think maybe it just exists on scales, Tim.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some people want that scale to include all the musical references and will change and develop their voice in a certain way. And then other folks are like, because poets, regardless of whether they perform with musicians or not, are very familiar with the music of poetry and talk about the poetry has to have music.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's the same, but it just occurs in gradations.
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks for that. Do you want to close us out with a couple more poems?
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, okay.
I would love to. All right, so this poem is called Train, and it says, train down the straight iron rails at 5, looking out, picking up rocks, hurling them into the woods. Heavy is the weight in a boy's arm. When he throws the rocks, he throws his whole body, feels the world in his arm. As the gnats rise into the air and graze his eyes. Not far from home, he hears the echoes of his mother's voice. Here the train comes, hear the whistle. At 5, train tracks, gust of the wind, the machine makes. A little boy wars in his heart, wars in his heart forever. And I'm going to look for one other poem on this computer, and then I'm going to finish with banned books if we have time for that.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Okay. Let me just see if I can find it. Sorry, it's taking me.
No worries.
Right. And this is untitled. Later that day, when I thought about heaven again, I remembered you in the morning with your head resting back, your eyes closed, lips together like there were no words left in the world. I kissed you. looked out onto the street and saw the snow in the trees, a young boy in a blue cap riding his bike into the cold. I turned back to you, but you had risen then, and I watched you walk away from me deeper into the house like a woman I never knew. Your dress was wrinkled, and I thought about your hips. We had already made love, and I wanted to kiss you again so that you would believe what I told you about the wild horses on the beach who eat out of strangers' hands and come to me in my dreams almost every night. And then the last poem will be Banned Books, which is the poem that I open up Inheritance with. And there are two quotes here. The first one is in Africa, when a man dies, so this is page 3. In Africa, when a man dies, it's a library burning. Hampate Ba. And then the second one is give a man a fish and he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish and feed him for a lifetime. Fall into the lake's mist this September, cool, the air over and under a silver line attached to a weight and a hook into water to find the bottom. Rest there a minute. Not far from here, my father on the edge above the plane of the water, looking down and looking out on a bank where earth pulls its gut worms, lures, hands arching to fingertips, threading, twisting, moving in early light. Did he know the November he died, his tackle box, his denim overalls, the small spray can, catfish bait, the smell of dried spam, rotting, preserved, the shriveled worm pasted to a rusted hook? Did he understand the great metaphors when he taught me art of watching water, of pulling out the tangles in a line, of singing want with its subtle distinctions? When he taught me waiting, he did not wait. He did not teach. Messy man with dirt caked into the ovals of his nails, blood and guts smeared across his waist, cigarettes dangling out of his mouth, smoke rising, killing and dying, raising his voice without patience. Tone I took his hate. Then I was afraid. The ghost of his eyes, thunder and impatience over tiny things, watching a rod, a line bending, throwing rocks into the water, not paying attention. Did he know of the burned Egyptian libraries? Did he know himself as the sages prescribed? Man with bamboo, walking into the tall plants, trying to find a good spot. If man is a symbol, my father is a penny, brown, copper, and abundant everywhere. He is used, and useless. Did he know that writing is not moment, dust is not really black, human is not flesh, that we are really impossible and believe in less? I banned his books in grief. My God, I've forgotten those mornings like nights, those nights like mornings.
Thanks so much, Brother Yao. I'm glad you ended on that poem because that's one of my favorite in the book. And I love that quote that leads off. Was it, in Africa, when an old man dies, it's a library burning. That's a great quote and a great riff on what you do with that. So I'm glad you read that one. Thanks so much.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, man, and thanks for doing Rattle and all the beautiful work that you do.
Well, it's always just my pleasure. And when you finish your next book, when you have that manuscript ready to go, send it my way, and we'll have you on again.
All right, that'll work, man.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So, Brother Yao, have a good night.
All right, you too.
Bye.
All right, peace.
So that was Brother Yao, and reading his book, Inheritance, which is available from Willow Editions, I think. Is that what it's called? Let me make sure I get the word right. Willow Books, which you can find at willow.net. So I recommend picking up a copy of this book, Inheritance, if you can. Really moving book for me personally, and those are his parents on the cover. So if you enjoyed Brother Yao, please do click the like button right now if you haven't yet, no matter where you're watching, or listening, I should say. You could be on iTunes. If you do that, give us a 5-star rating for this podcast, and make sure you subscribe and tell your friends. If you're on YouTube watching live, make sure to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't yet, and click the bell so you get notifications. We do this every Tuesday night. And now we're going to move on to our epilogue, which is the open mic portion of the show. I have, I have 3 pre-recorded poets. I have John Luna with that long poem that was a little quiet that we bumped up from last episode. Then Charlie Baylis from England, and Cathy Prather Russell from Michigan, lined up as the pre-recorded open mics. And then I also have Rizzo, Liz Gallo, so it's a battle of the Lizzes, and Michelle Parks, possibly if we have time, doing Skype. If you would like to call in on Skype, all you have to do is send me a text message. So log into Skype and send a text message to me at Rattle Poetry, all one word. It'll pop right up, and you'll be able to. I'll text you back and let you know that I have you lined up, and we'll read a poem of yours. So let's see. Let's start with one of the open mic poets from the pre-recorded. Let's do Charlie Baylis. You have to bear with me just 1 second as I fire this up. Okay. So let me find his poem. Now, this is Charlie Baylis from Nottingham, England. And let's see, he's the editor of Anthropocene, which is a magazine. His poetry has been nominated twice for the Pushcart Prize and once for the Forward Prize. His most recent publication is in Drag City, and he spent his spare time completely adrift of reality, which is how I like to spend my free time too. So here he is reading his poem, Okinawa.
Hi, this is Charlie Baylis, and I'm going to read my poem, Okinawa. I'm calling from Cartagena in Spain, but hailing from Nottingham in England, home of Robin Hood and the world's greatest football team. Okinawa is a poem set in Japan, and it was featured in Ambit. Okinawa. Around the corner from the refinery, a red lighthouse dances with a green lighthouse in the ballroom. I gave my sandals to the sea. You said stop, pull the rain over me. A silent spirit, lost on the ocean path, a shadow spent over water. The black boat burns, you walk the ruins with me, across the old country. I take you, smoke spirals from the napalm grass. I can only stand so much of the waves' delicacy. 13 villas, one empty, 64 steps to the sea, then back 64 steps of radiant blue. The orphan, draped in expensive rags, gun in hand, the promise of hypnotic beauty, the torpedo gathering momentum, a golden strand of hair on the sand, or the foam print pattern on your back, tensed, heavy air, bullets, a vortex, and a shell. We seduce the machines which destroy us with Roman candles and mass graves. I am not interested in symmetry. The moment has passed. Ghosts in the back, whacked out soldiers, white wine and cigarettes, an outstretched palm. You are no longer. I am no longer. Who would want to be?
So that was Charlie Baylis from Nottingham, England, calling in from Spain, though, reading Okinawa. So thanks so much for sharing that with us, Charlie. And Charlie did that perfectly, introducing himself in the poem a little bit, so I don't have to, and I can avoid butchering your name, which I do all the time. I'm very sorry about that. But Charlie Baylis is pretty easy. Okay, so let's go to the Skype. Just bear with me a second. I'm going to call Liz Gallo first, because she's the first person to ask to be on. So hang on one second. I got the ringtone in my ear. We'll see if Liz Gallo picks up. Well, Liz Gallo didn't pick up. I'll try Liz again in a little bit. Let's try Liz Rizzo first, then. And Liz Rizzo's picking up. Hang on just 1 second. Liz, if you're there, click on the camera button to make sure that the video is showing. There she is, Liz Rizzo. Hang on, let me pull you into the feed first so everybody can see you. But you are now on screen and on video. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
So where are you calling from tonight?
Well, I'm calling from Los Angeles, and I volunteer for an organization called Write Girl, and we mentor teen girls in writing and self-expression. So I thought it would be fun to read a couple short poems that I've had published in Write Girl anthologies when mentors were included.
Yeah, that'd definitely be a lot of fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Should I just dive right in?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So the first little poem is called Wednesday Meeting, and the introduction says, I write poems in business meetings, don't tell anyone. Wednesday Meeting. With eyes and fingers intent on his laptop, he thinks about numbers and lunches and reports while he listens to the meeting. Speaking up when he has something to contribute, he crosses off the calls he made from the car, multitasking the same way I listen to audiobooks while I type up the minutes, except he's not sitting there thinking about kissing me. And then the second poem is from our anthology called Emotional Map of Los Angeles. And this one is called In One Ohm. And I said, this is a piece about the moment after Shavasana in yoga practice, when we roll on our sides and curl in a fetal position for a moment. I wrote it while considering my fingers. In One Ohm. Palm to floor, I consider my fingers sideways with newly opened eyes. Heads rested on arms, we breathe. With legs bent fetal, pause. To consider my practice, regrounded, rebounded. In the moment between Shavasana and Namaste, we awaken, we roll, we curl, touch the floor and push up. In this room together, we are reborn. Thank you.
Yeah, those are great. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what Write Girl is and does?
I would love that. It's a Los Angeles-based organization. During the school year, in our main mentoring program, we have these amazing writing workshops, different genres every month. And like 100 teen girls and 100 women writers come together, and we do all kinds of fun things, and the girls write, and it's really wonderful. It's very inspiring. The girls are amazing writers.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. Thanks so much. Is there a website people can go to
There
for
is.
even more information? Yeah.
Yes, that would be awesome. We always need support and we always need more mentors.
Mm-hmm.
Women mentors for the main program and also men mentors. We have another program called Bold Inc.
Uh-huh.
And you can find out about that at rightgirl.org.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for calling. That was a great reading, and you clearly know how to use Skype because you're all set and perfect background and perfect framing. It's nice to, yeah. Thanks so much for calling in.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I hope you do sometime again.
Yes, thanks.
Okay, have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye. So that was Liz Rizzo talking about Right Girl, and so check that out if you can. Let's do one more. Actually, I think Liz Gallo is messaging me right now, so I will just call her up. And she says she was just turning off her washing machine, which is probably a good idea. You don't want the washing machine running in the background. We'll give her a call right now. So Liz Rizzo, I have you on. Let me pull you into. Actually, I don't need to do anything. It's all set up now perfectly. So here you are. You're on screen and on video. Thanks so much for calling in again.
No problem.
Yeah,
Sorry, I missed the first time.
No problem. Refresh my memory. Where are you calling from? I don't remember.
I'm in Toronto.
Ah, that's right.
Now.
Okay.
I'm an American in Toronto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
yeah. Awesome. So what do you have for us tonight?
So I'm just going to read one very, very short and one short poem from a play I co-wrote with another writer here in Toronto, who's very talented, and we've performed this play a couple times, and most notably at the Canadian Festival of Spoken Word about 2 years ago.
Very cool.
So this play is called Air, and this first sort of poem from the play is called Space. For 1.2 seconds, we were in space, arms wrapped around each other. We embraced, lifted off. Yes, this was space. Until gravity pulled you down. With your right hand, you gently pushed away my left, while your left hand waited and grazed my right, as if to say, I kind of like the view from this space. Back on Earth, your words are soft. With the world holding you down, I still float in a red dress, somewhere above the clouds.
Very nice. Yeah.
I'm going to do one more from the ending poem that my character recites in Air, and this is called Multiverse. In the multiverse of our verses, we are not man or woman or human. We descend in the dark forest, touching the abyss. Outside a universe may exist, where fairies do fly and objects do move with our eyes, and sounds are celestial, revolving around our evolution until we are no longer man or woman or human. Only space, only light, only warmth in the night. Each breath is filled not with oxygen or nitrogen or water as we swim in the stars, through each other's arms, hear each other's lungs, see each other's hearts, touch each other's tongues, spinning thoughts into memories of love and hate, passion and fates, until we are no longer man or woman or human. Only space, only light, only warmth in the night. Only space, only light, only warmth in the night. Thanks.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you, Liz. Well read too. That was really entertaining. Thanks so much for sharing.
Thank you. No problem. Well, there's a whole play for that,
Mm-hmm.
along with performed with another person. So.
Do you act out in the play, or do you do it for other actors? Yeah.
Yeah, we work well when we wrote this play. Myself and Dane Swan is the other poet, and
Mm-hmm.
he's had some books published here in Canada and that. And we performed it together and set it to music. So
Mm-hmm.
he played acoustic guitar.
Oh, very cool.
Throughout the piece. So
Mm-hmm.
just guitar riffs is very simple because I'm not a singer or anything like
Uh-huh.
that.
Yeah.
So I was a little scared when he was like, we're going to put this to music.
Mm-hmm.
So we did perform it ourselves. We both have sort of performance poetry backgrounds as well. So But I think if I were to stage it more, I might actually get real actors, not myself.
Well, you are great here. Thanks so much for sharing that with everybody and for calling in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night.
You too.
Okay. So that was Liz Gallo. Thanks so much for Liz calling in. Let's do, let me see. Let's do this long poem. If we this is a 10-minute job, so be ready. This is John Luna, and he submitted this way back in early August before I made a time limit. This is a work in progress, this whole podcast, Rattlecast poetry show. So, which brings up a good point. If you have any suggestions for things I could change or do differently or add or subtract, just do let me know. There's a million ways to contact me through Rattle or through Facebook or through Twitter or through Skype chat here or the chat room on YouTube, comments on SoundCloud. There are just so many places. I see it all because I'm always here. So, yeah, let me know if you have any ideas or suggestions or things that you did not like. That helps a lot too, actually. So this is a work in progress, like I was saying. There's now a 5-minute time limit I'm imposing for the pre-recorded poems, but this was submitted before. It's a really good piece, too. So I'm definitely going to play it. This is John Luna. And John Luna is from Victoria, British Columbia. Let me read his bio. He's a Mexican-American artist whose practice as a visual artist and writer includes painting and installation, critical writing and poetry, and teaching art as well as art history and theory. Publication of his poetry has appeared in Ditch, Canyon, Cordite, Train, Guest, Matrix, Hamilton, Arts and Letters, among others. And his first collection of poems, Listing, was released through Decoupage Publishing in 2015. His second book was shortlisted for the Robert Croce Award for Innovative Poetry in 2017. So if you enjoy this, I'm sure if you Google John Luna, you'll find him pretty quickly. And here is John Luna, and hopefully I turned the volume up loud enough that it'll work this time, reading Yadigan.
Hi, my name is John Luna. I'm a writer and artist from Shawnigan Lake, British Columbia. The poem I'm going to be reading is called Yatigan. It is part of a series of ekphrastic prose poems based on the notion of scent. This poem was originally published in Matrix magazine from Concordia in Montreal, and that issue was the Mad Pride issue edited by Roxana Bennett. Yadigan. Updated directives for getting lost in Arcadia. Misread instead 365 poems for every occultism. Polygraph Park. Rescindering of fires. Haunted by horse guests. Astutely becoming more than a statue, but less than a man. Painted in like the ones who going were before in your place. Before I admit it, I'm already writing myself down amid writhing, spiraling wills. A body attuned to the room, a groom poised softly on smoldering cap-toed calfskin dancer's heels. Dressed in the threshold of the closet doors, mirror observations at tacked angles. The dreaded figure drifting away from the framing gaze's legitimate complaint. Longevity. And this, by the way, should be put into perspective, applying yourself to the bright end of the candle, last half as long, hoping to burn at least once more as bright. Father's enthusiasm for consuming war. Movies, books, TV shows, clothes, model planes, politics, unpleasantries, accents, was all too infectious. I have fond memories of going out with him to weather on his porch chair, where, wearing his hugging, shearling coat, he smoked unfiltered shit. Carrying those burdens that run down our one side of the family and up the other, only ever drawn out through picture, history, and song. When don't we quit it, deciding enough has been done to death, reposing and so let death file away the breast? In my lifetime means before the end of the world, and or if this movie never ends. Death becomes his picture maker just as we begin to picture him in his world become irritant, afterlit, and post-traumatic. An arc of stars goes from astringent shivers to warm gas jets to bitter gall to earthy fertilizer to tonic. Shared precedent pressures of breath at the starburst of a butt-end become dragged out, dank for all time scat call of sentimental vendettage and pathetic loft of newspapers folding and unfolding, prayers in shared subway tunnel air. Outside are all else. Opaque pine fog, mentholated in grisaille. Terraced distances and tree sap smoke, blanketing caramelized needle-stroked ground coat around cross-hatched rows of roads and odd lots of houses sullenly pulled up and put up for sale. The stale smell of leaves pulled from deep recesses with snow caking to each tread, tannic ringing versos as the crevasse of each cheek above the dimple fills with sorrow's core soul complaints, as the sun in bright polarized pigmentations, called flash and sola fide, carry through these days of delays, as a notebook kept in any and all circumstances. Protection against fatigue and stupor humor, sorter of priorities, if only to make up later time for making time up. Winter darkened views from the parked car windows. Heaven in the tenacious husk of birch trees belonging to the night of someone else's lights. His eyes half closed, resting after having undergone the knife. Being now some other something, than with breath of life, and nothing achieved by a brute force, but only by some arcane right. Now, under brain, mumbling a cracked chill back to impassive, opalescent scrollwork of etched old lady mirrors of forest frost, and beyond block felted black and white rabbits, we melt into with our sight are as mountains. There's sight an artist has created with a live feed of a CGI stag that drifts or dashes through the random sandbox backdrop of Grand Theft Auto, an alternate fraud faultland of California or Nevada. We could watch for hours as it paces the scrub and sage outside a truck stop, or wavers along the desolated nightfall's Roman candle manic depressive strand. One time this happened. Crashes that blurred the screen. Thunder or demi/distant explosions. A crash blurring the senses. Not far off, sirens on the highway make the stag start moving forward. A bang! Car careered and careened, yielding sparks spurting up off the overpass as it tumbled. The membranous screen within the screen shuddered, shouldered, raining and darker. Suddenly the stag started falling over. Whoop! Getting up, wham! Fell over, blam! A cat dummying in the sun, legs out sideways on the lamb. A man was flopped down from the sky, tossed next to the collapsing stag. Crack! A pipe landed crosswise over the man's chest, a pointing black finger burning and slow, unfurling flags of rendered flame that held but wouldn't consume him. The car came down next, flung as if in ecstasy at the feet of the still prone man and the stag's hind hooves where they lay, hovering side by side. We misspoke our destination and allegedly ended up trapped in allegorical wood grain, segregating. Easterly morning's grassy plain from western night's divided valley, where cold on the home front meets thaw at the verdant verge. Eventually we found our way, or, as is so often the case with elegies, were ourselves found out. In these continuing successive dream sequences there is no money, as ever, but we, still trying to win out against the absentee authorities that make us captive, cry, "Release the ashes! like Shakespearean characters torn out of context as we fall again into ourselves, asleep. Now up and awake, as someone, or rather somewhat, else. Or what? Or else. A quick disclaimer to say. It's annoying when we're away from the time of any breakthrough. Mostly subtleties get lost. The situation requires us to adjust our expectations and relate rather than analyze. These woods, for instance, why they interact with the body's temperature in a way that feels spontaneously cool while seeming to physically prick the skin, unaccountably rendered echoes of presence engendered in an open space, just as between us densely overlapped senses under blankets at night, a physical transference of each other's imprint of being in the world. Traveling, discovering places where the invisible culture sustains us all. In every book that gets picked up and thumbed through as dog years we discard. Luminous, dynamic, heartwood of cut-up conifer trunk left outside to redden under overhanging boughs all spring and summer and fall, quite consumed in revelatory weight of soft cinder pleats between fingers of charcoal. Brush past famished, varnished, old-world paneling of churches or Buddhist temples, doors. Sponged with incense, calligraphic ash as air kisses, wish fulfillment for warrants and wants, wafting gingerly over the hard creak of battered boards, not thinking for a moment that each footfall that these bespeak does not anticipate one or more of your own. Thinking settled in where groundwater runs all night, amid saintly entanglements, odors of decay, heavy decomposing and sensible seepage. Suppose we might get to work again tomorrow. Yet again, a minor journey all by itself, what with tensions and stress pinned through, thought triggers everywhere, depleted electrolytes and post-seizure brainstorm, giving way to new and more substantial blows to an ego on the go. But anyways, always, discern why and when, to whom or for what / on what / for whom or with whom we pray our pray each day, etc.
So that was John Luna reading Yatagan. Thanks so much, John. That was a great reading. That was probably the longest poem we'll ever do on the open mic, but nobody dropped out while listening to that who was watching live. So, and that was an excellent reading and a very, as I think Liz said, Liz Rizzo said, it was very atmospheric. I have to listen to this later on the podcast audio only version as I walk my dog through the woods at midnight in the full moon and see if maybe sometimes we should do poems that long. That was really cool. So thank you, John Luna. Once again, that was John Luna from Victoria, British Columbia. And his book of poems is Listing. So check that out if you can. So let's call Michelle Parks. I love that we have a bunch of people, about a dozen or 24 people who are here all the time. And I think it's great. And Michelle is one of those poets. So let's bring her into the stream and see what she has for us today. Michelle Parks, hang on just 1 second. Let me turn you on. And we are here. Hello, Michelle, calling from South Carolina again.
Yeah, it's excellent. I'm glad to get to be here tonight.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And I really love that we have repeat callers and people who watch every week, because it makes it feel, for me personally, I don't know about everybody else, but it makes it feel like I'm sitting around doing something with a group of people, which is really important. So thanks so much for participating. And what do you have for us today, Michelle?
Well, you probably don't remember because you read thousands and tens of thousands of poems a year, but about 3 years ago, I dipped my toes into submitting to Rattle Magazine's $10,000 annual contest because it's a no-brainer. You get a year's subscription for entering the contest with all the chapbooks and all that great stuff. So I entered twice, and it was from what I call my Evolution of an Addict series.
Mm-hmm.
So it's based on my life. So very personal to me.
Awesome. Well, I definitely read it. We'll see if I remember it. There's a huge ocean of poems in between that and this, but let's hear it. Thanks so much for sharing.
Oh, certainly. It's called RX. Pain calculates, divides razors and shoulder blades etched in grief. The world waits. Carried over and under, we weigh our gray matter in ounces like lead, heavy, gripping, needles sharp, yielding. Hold on. Sometimes I can't sleep through the measures of miles of mortar and pestles. There's rust on my spoon. From the earth, I've uplifted my tomb. There's no kindness in this fallacious vaccine. No blue pill to forget the sunsets to burn. Backs bowed to toils in a languishing garden where fools sweep to water pestilent thorns.
Well, thank you, Michelle. That was great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing another poem. And I hope you see you next week.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I love it.
Okay. Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
So that was Michelle Parks calling in again on Skype. And you too can call in on Skype anytime you want. Just send me a text message to Rattle Poetry. But you're going to have to wait till next week because we are pretty much done. I'm going to do one more last pre-recorded open mic poem to close us out. And this is Cathy Prather Russell from Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan. And she's a published author and CEO of Carol Greeting and Gift Shop and Gift of a Helping Hand Charitable TR. And this poem, God Never Left Me, is a published piece from her poetry book entitled Life, Journey, and Experiences Through My Eyes. The poetry book is available on Amazon, so just look up that, Life, Journey, and Experiences Through My Eyes. This is Cathy Prather Russell. And here she goes.
God Never Left Me by Cathy Prather Russell, recorded in Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan. Often I am smiling, but deep inside I am wearing a frown. I am sobbing but determined to change my life around. God has never left me. I know He sees all my tears and pain. I repeat to myself always, I have got to maintain. Disowned by my family, no friends to love me. My husband acts like I don't exist. I can go on and on with my lonely list. I look around for answers, wondering why this burden has fallen to me. I pray to God up above to take away my worry, to set my sorrows free. Though I sat in my dark and cold home all alone, I know God has never left me, for He will provide the skills for me to carry on. God never left, for He has greater plans for me. God will allow me to soar higher than I have ever dreamed. So I wiped away my tears, looking forward to a greater day, because I know God is providing for me, and He will make a way. Though I cannot see what the future will bring, I still give praise to Him for each and everything. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Cathy Prather Russell from Grosse Pointe Woods, Michigan. That was God Never Left Me. And once again, her book of poems is Life, Journey, and Experiences Through My Eyes, which you can find on Amazon.com. And that is our show for today. Thanks everybody who tuned in. I'm sure everybody who's watching has already clicked the like button and subscribed, so I won't even bother saying that again, even though I just did. let's see. And I would like to say, too, I think this is the first episode of the podcast where I didn't screw anything up. And I think I can just download the audio and make it a podcast. So we're ready to roll. I won't have to do any editing tonight. That's really nice. Let's see, who is up next week? Next week we have Aaron Puchigian plus an open mic. So Aaron Puchigian's a formal poet who's appeared in, I think, maybe 2 issues of Rattle, plus maybe Poets Respond once. I have to look it up again. And his book, Mr. Either Or, is a novel in verse, so I assume he'll be writing a big, reading a section from that book and sort of explaining what goes on. I haven't had a chance to read it yet myself, so I'm looking forward to doing that. It's hard to find time to read a whole novel in verse, and I'm looking forward to doing that over the next week. So tune in next Tuesday, and remember that we're going to start a new way. We're going to do a pre-show starting at about 5:45, and then we'll call Aaron at 6, so you know what time Aaron's going to appear. We'll do Aaron for about 45-50 minutes, and then we'll do the open mic after that. So we're kind of shifting everything back about 15 minutes to make it a little more casual, I think. I think it's going to be fun to do it that way. And so I will see you then. Thanks to everybody who called in on the open mic. Thanks to Brother Yao. Let me show his book one more time because it's a great book, and I do hope you pick up a copy. This is Brother Yao, Hoke Glover III's book, Inheritance. So that's it for today. Thanks again, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.